Good evening. So I'm picking up the tale on the east side of the Atlantic, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got involved in the Atlantic rowing race, again through a series of yeses. So back at sixth form, I moved to Northwich, which isn't far from where I live now. I knew nobody. So I moved school and I moved home at the same time, and I had a letter from our sixth form college saying, "We see you've played sport, come and try rowing." Beginning of the summer holiday, nothing to do, no friends, why wouldn't I? So that was my first yes in a series of many. I don't have a photograph of us rowing there before Facebook days. I do have a photograph of us with many trophies, and we thought we were quite good. It turns out that actually our coach was very good at taking us to races we could win, which isn't really the same thing. So when I moved to Chester and thought I was not too bad, and they welcomed me by saying, "You're a bit small, we'll see what we can do with you. I can't imagine you'll be in any of the very good boats though." I wasn't that thrown and just kept turning up. It turned out that quite a lot of other people didn't keep turning up that year, and I managed to sneak my way into the end of the top boat. From there, that gave me the confidence at university to row again in small boats with the uni, but getting bigger each time now. So I've gone from a tiny little boat on the River Weaver up to racing on the Tyne, racing down at Henley, and racing on the Thames in London, which is the biggest expanse of water that I would have raced on at that time. Then I retired from rowing because we did a lot of training at uni until I moved to Southampton and the sun shone and I thought, oh, this looks nice. So I rocked up to my local rowing club where they did a lot of coastal rowing and found myself getting sucked back in. But I really enjoyed it. Bigger expanses of water, something a little bit different, and a bigger boat. From there, I was seconded to Jersey with work where they were offshore racing. And the biggest races I did there were Sark to Jersey, and then one in France where you race to an island to have lunch, have a glass of wine and a bit of cheese, and then race back to the mainland again, which was something quite different from my university experience. So at that point, I knew there were some girls in the club who were planning to do this Atlantic row, had no intention of taking part in it, but they hadn't really got all their preparation together in time and asked me to join the crew as a third person out of a new crew of 4 just to share the work. So from that little yes at sixth form, for a little boat just to fill the time, I ended up taking part in the Atlantic rowing race. Having been through a number of months of trying to get the equipment together, the boat together, the food together, the mandatory training, we found ourselves in Gomera at the start of December, or end of November. We were meant to have 2 weeks before starting the race at the beginning of December, but unfortunately, the weather systems in that year were really very strange, and we weren't allowed to leave the marina for an extra 4 weeks. So the Azores high that's meant to make the Tradewinds happen, that mean that Atlantic rowing boats just head south a bit and then surf to Antigua, just didn't turn up. So the consequence for us was an extra 4 weeks hanging around in Gomera, and then no Tradewinds, which we'll come to a little bit later. But eventually, after 6 weeks of chilling out on a tiny little island in the sunshine, we hit race start. This gives just a little bit of a feel for how things were over the first couple of minutes. At this point, you could still see other boats in the race, and it was quite an exciting time. Didn't really last for long, and you end up not being able to see other boats very quickly. So we started our race. Again, you can see the other boats in the distance. 3,000 miles to Antigua, 31 crews are racing. Racing through the day, racing through the night. So we had a 2-hour shift system, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, all the day and all the night. We'd adjusted those hours a little bit early on, but this was pretty much hitting into a standard routine. And the night rowing was really very peaceful. I really enjoyed that most of the time, until things like this happened. This is a flying fish, and this should not exist. This is something between a fish and a bird. It's not quite sure what it is, but when you get to a particular point in the ocean, they fly from the water, and in the middle of the night, they just hit you. Now, the first time we saw one of these, well, felt one of these, it hit me in the face. And Joe, who I did most of my rowing with, said, "Don't worry, I've got this, I'll save you." So she stood up, she came, she tried to pick up the fish, and the fish jumped, leapt, made Jo scream. She ran back to her seat, back down, and told me it was my problem. Thank you, Jo. So eventually, I managed to throw this flapping fish overboard, just about, and we settled down for the rest of the day, rest of the night. The following day, we had a few more fish in the boat, and Jo and I were in the cabin but awake, listening as the first one flew in to hit Kylie and Sarah. Well, we thought this would be a bit of a laugh and we'd be able to hear them chasing this fish around the boat, the same as we'd done the night before. But it didn't really work like that. So Kylie just said to this fish, "Now then, little fish, don't you worry. You just stay there nice and calm, and I'll pop you back in the sea, and you can get on with your day, and we can get on with our row." And that fish just sat there and let her pick it up and flip it overboard. And Jo and I were mortified. And Kylie is now known as the Fish Whisperer. But it wasn't all fun and games and fish, and we did have our share of not so good days as well. So this photograph of the GPS, this is from a point where we were 365 miles from the finish, which in a 3,000-mile race should be nearly there. But what you can see here is a day in which we've gone forward 16 miles in the day, and then we've gone back 15 miles overnight. So with 365 miles to go and a net gain in a 24-hour period of 1 mile, that's quite a lot of time left at sea, and a thought that I chose not to share with my teammates. But having said that, for that 24-hour period, we were the only boat in the fleet of 31 crews that made any forward progress. So we were actually really quite happy with that, which just goes to show a bit of perspective, means quite a lot. Because we were delayed at the start, we also ended up being at sea on Valentine's Day. Now, my Valentine's Day this year was a little non-standard, but not so much as this. The race of 31 boats had 2 support yachts, which came and drifted in the fleet and said hello here and there, but the fleet is hundreds of miles apart by now. So we actually only saw the support yacht once. And it happened to choose to come on Valentine's Day, which we'd also designated as Superheroes Day, because why wouldn't you? So we're not entirely convinced that their check-in on our mental health was giving them quite the reassurance that they were perhaps hoping for. But we had a great time, lovely to see some new faces, and conveniently we found this bottle of Prosecco bobbing in the ocean not long after their visit. So it was definitely nice that they came. So when I mentioned the Tradewinds, these are the winds that create the waves that start on the east side and roll all the way to the west. And any fortunate Atlantic rowing crew will tell you how they picked up on these big waves the size of tower blocks and surfed 50 miles in a day. We didn't get much of that. We had one 50-mile day. It was the last day that we were at sea. We didn't have any negative days, but most of ours were around the 20 and 30, and most of the time the sea was not as flat as these photographs, but rolling at best. So I feel a little bit cheated sometimes when people tell me how quickly they've rowed across the Atlantic and that they've done it in so few days, knowing that they've surfed it, whereas we took ages, but we rowed almost every single stroke, day and night. But we enjoyed it a lot while we were doing it, to be fair. So we were hoping when we went to sea that we might beat the women's world record of 51 days. The fastest crew in our fleet that year was actually a solo, extremely good athlete who was around the 50-day mark, I think. We finally arrived in Antigua after 75 days, 7 hours and 29 minutes. So just for a little bit of context, that's approximately the same amount of time as we've been in lockdown. Or for another bit of context, it's just before the schools went back in January and we finished in the Easter holidays. So yeah, that was my story of yeses.
Wow, amazing. Thank you so much, Karen. That is insane. Love it.
Yes. I love it.